Hello, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the Global Director of Content at Informa Pharma Intelligence. We're the publishers of Scrip, Pink Sheet, In Vivo and Generics Bulletin. We're here in the BioEurope Spring Meeting in Amsterdam. This is a meeting where many of the stakeholders in the biopharmaceutical world, whether it's big pharma, biotechs or even investors, get together to share developments, progress, but also start the initial discussions around potential deal making or potential investments. One of the big challenges for European biotechs in particular has always been, can they access enough capital? I'm joined by Barbara Freischem, who is the Executive Director of the European Biopharmaceutical Enterprises, which is the biopharma arm of FPA. So thanks for joining us, Barbara. So you were at this meeting, you were chairing a panel which was looking at that funding gap, and the European Investment Bank has just put out a report. What were the key take-home messages from that presentation for you?
Thank you, Mike, for the opportunity to talk to you. The big take-home message from the report by the European Investment Bank is that if you look at key life science clusters across Europe, they forecast a funding shortage of up to 40 billion euros over the next 2 or 3 years, and I think that is quite a significant amount. Yeah. It is a topic that's dear to our heart as an industry association, because our members include SMEs that strive to grow in the European environment. Many of our members actually have to go to the US to find adequate funding. So we really welcome the initiatives by the European Investment Bank and the European Commission to improve the funding that is available in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, in some respects, the European industry is almost a victim of its own success, because the reason why there's a 40 billion euro shortfall is because they've got so many programs that are moving into late stage clinical development. So did you get the sense that there is the political will at the European Commission and the European Investment Bank that they will try and help sort that problem out?
To a degree they do, yes. There are, especially the European Investment Bank has a number of programs available to perhaps larger companies that have developed portfolios, so who are more than a one asset company. And that's really where in the report they see the biggest gap. So I think the Commission and the Investment Bank are actually putting the money where their mouth is. An example of what I was thinking about is UCB really getting, I think it was 50 million euros from the European Investment Bank to develop a portfolio of assets to market, and there are different stages. So for the European Investment Bank, it means that some of these substances will come through, and it won't be a complete loss. And part of the discussion today at the panel was also that if you have a one asset company and you invest in maybe one or two companies in late stage trials, you put in a huge amount of money, you run a huge risk, because a number of those clinical trials will fail. Yeah. So when you do the portfolio investment, I think you're much better off.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, they were saying you can't just put all your eggs in one basket, but actually if you're interested in a particular area, why not back a number of companies, so that if one has a clinical disappointment, there's a good chance the one that has the success, you'll get 3-4x back. Exactly. And I mean, they did highlight some of the the successes that there are in the European bio space. For example, Ablinks, which is acquired this year by Sanofi for a huge chunk of money. So your membership and the people who are that you're representing, what sort of messages is EBE getting from member companies, and what are you pressing from the capital markets?
Right. Well, we have a diverse portfolio of companies, so we have several messages for different stages. A key message would really be make sure the capital markets union in Europe happens for life science companies. The fragmentation of the capital market is really one of the biggest hurdles to finding enough funding in Europe. And my members strongly believe that a capital markets unit would be the way to address that. Now, I come from a fiercely proud country that values its own stock market very much. But if you make the industry grow across Europe with one capital market, I think that will benefit everyone. Other messages include that you also need early stage funding or specific therapeutic areas funding, and the Commission is doing a lot of that. One of the questions that came up in today's discussion was about funding of development of antibiotics, which is a difficult field because your companies need to develop products which then are put on shelves and not sold. So how can you sell that?
It's a sort of it's trying to work out the economics of actually how do you develop antibiotics that, as you say, you don't want people to use, but you need them just in case that there's a problem. I mean, it's interesting sort of saying about the idea of having a single European capital market. I mean, this is not a new. I remember when the London Stock Exchange back in 92, 93 eased its listing rules to actually allow life science companies, and then we saw the creation of things like the Neue Markt in Germany, the SWX in Switzerland, and there was the attempt of ESDAC, which was a sort of a European NASDAQ. That hasn't worked. What is interesting though is that the NASDAQ, which already kind of has little positions in Europe, is a place for biotechs to be able to raise money, and we've seen a lot of European companies actually do that. Is that a problem if they can sort of tap the deep pools of capital in the US? Is that a problem for European biotechs?
Not necessarily per se, unless the earnings remain in the US, because if the remainings all remain in the US when companies do an IPO on NASDAQ, then Europe funds the early stage development, and the US would basically reap the benefit of the companies going to market. Now, European investors aren't stupid either, so if they participate in the NASDAQ and some of the money flows back to Europe, and you have situations where a European-based company like Sanofi acquires a European-based other company or asset, if I may say so, like Ablings, then the investment of public money or taxpayers' money through the European Commission will have paid off, because you will have the economic growth also in Europe. If you end up in a situation where you only fund early stage companies in Europe and then they end up everywhere else in the world except for Europe, I think we would have a mismatch, and this is something we're trying to avoid.
So one of the things in that European Investment Bank report, where they were sort of saying it could be 40 billion euros as the shortfall, 30 billion of that was in the UK.
Yes.
So actually, when the UK leaves the European Union, actually you're only going to have a 10 billion shortfall in Europe, which is probably more manageable.
For us, yes.
Yes.
But not for the southeast of England.
No, that's it. So that's another sort of challenge about and the fact that the European Investment Fund is a big cornerstone investor of a lot of the early stage funds. So it was interesting because the sort of the headline numbers, it kind of it kind of looked a bit worrying. One could have almost taken sort of a pessimistic view of the state of the European biotech sector because there's this potential shortfall. Are there reasons to be optimistic?
Absolutely, because you did see how much money is being invested. The report also shows that, and it also, if you look at the global numbers and the development numbers, the European life science sector has dramatically improved the funding that it has available over the past years. Now, I've only been in this industry for 2.5 years, but yes, I can already see the increase. So there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about it. We also, perhaps, as a European industry, should take care not to try to copy-paste everything that works in the US. We are Europe. We actually thrive on our diversity. So I think we should really look at developing our own solutions that work for Europe. But nevertheless, a capital markets union would be helpful.
So no, I think that's just sort of like a political question, and it's something that the politicians need to resolve. But from our own research, we do know that if one was to compare the European biotech scene now than say 30 years ago, when I started covering this industry, it's a completely different beast. And these days we are actually sort of seeing more money, certainly in the early stages, going into biotechs. Yeah. The challenge is that the access to patient capital, which was one of the things that the European Investment Bank was sort of saying that we need more of. And I guess in the UK, with creations like Arix Bioscience or the Woodford funds, yeah, that kind of creates that. Anyway, so Barbara, sort of thanks for stopping by, and it was a great panel.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you to the European Investment Bank for the report and for the attempt to kickstart the patient capital funding in Europe, which is what they're trying to do.
Excellent. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.